Hi, everybody, and welcome to this segment of Ars Lyrica's Concerts and Conversations. I'm Matthew Dirst, the Artistic Director, and we're delighted to have with us today Annette Richards, Professor of Music from Cornell University, and a great friend of mine, with whom I've collaborated on numerous projects over the years, including one several years ago at Cornell that featured some music that we're going to sample on this virtual program together. The topic today, the topic for the whole week really, is music and politics, which we're interpreting fairly broadly to include music and gender politics, for example, music and the way society melds together oftentimes political figures like important patrons with important musicians. So our conversation will stay mostly in the 18th century, I think, and be centered around those areas of interest, of great interest to both myself and to Annette, including the orbit of C.P.E. Bach in Berlin, and a few fantastic musical inventions from this era, notably the Glass Harmonica and Benjamin Franklin, of all people. Perhaps we should start with Ben Franklin, our one American political figure that we're including in this segment, because he was, after all, not only an important political figure, but also a gifted inventor and a fine musician, apparently. Annette, you drew my attention years ago to his work in this area and to the music that it inspired for Glass Harmonica, hence this program at Cornell, from which we repeated a few pieces on a subscription program here in Houston a few seasons ago. That's what we're going to be looking at on some video excerpts. Could you tell us a little bit about Ben Franklin and this weird invention of his, the Glass Harmonica?
Well, Matthew, I mean, thank you for giving me the chance to talk about this, one of my absolutely favorite topics. So Ben Franklin was in London, and in his incredible curiosity about basically absolutely everything, he heard one day, or he encountered somebody playing the musical glasses. So I don't know how many of you have tried making a sound come out of a wine glass, but you know how it works when you run your finger around the rim and out comes this ghostly wonderful sound. And many of you will have seen that this wonderful instrument, which essentially means you have a whole bunch of different glasses with water filled to different height, and you get different pitches. And you can play pieces by doing this very complicated thing from one glass to another. And Ben Franklin thought, how about we do this a whole different way? And his brilliant invention was to essentially turn the glasses on their side, nest them one into the other, so from very large to tiny, have them put onto a spindle, which a player could make spin in the same way that you make a sewing machine work, so with a little treadle. And then with wet fingers, instead of having water in the glass, but making your fingers wet, and holding them against this essentially sort of keyboard-like glass instrument, you can make the thing sound in that way. And so he created this much more ergonomically favorable and in some sense easier to play instrument out of these glasses, and he named it harmonica. I mean, I think he was thinking, you know, it's the sort of ultimate music. It's, you know, you can hear he's thinking harmonia, harmony, as well as, you know, harmonica. So it became known as the Franklin harmonica, and we talk about it as the glass harmonica. And from there, he essentially taught a very gifted Irish English woman how to play it. And she took it on tour to Europe, first to Paris and then to the rest of Europe. And it essentially took Europe by storm. And of course, Franklin, because he had also famously invented the lightning conductor and done all these experiments with electricity, people in Europe sort of heard this, the Franklin harmonica, as a kind of weird melding of the music of the spheres with electricity, with the kind of weird sensitivities of the human body. So you got this incredibly kind of potent combination, which then becomes a vehicle for composers and performers across Europe in the late, you know, so that was in the early 1760s, and then way up into the end of the 18th century, the instrument is a thing that people knew and played and composed for.
Annette, would you like to say a word or two about the kind of fantastic musical machines that preceded this? Because I know you've done some research into, say, Vaucanson and the automatic flute player. These were the rage in the middle of the 18th century, particularly among educated elites like Frederick the Great, who had several of them installed at Potsdam in the gardens and in his various palaces. These preceded Ben Franklin's invention of the glass harmonica, but in a sense they are kind of related.
I think that's yes. I think that's a very, very good point. It's very much the age of invention, experimentation, and a real fascination with sort of complex machinery and mechanical operations. And it's also, of course, there's a sort of another strand going through which has to do with questions about what the human, the different, where is the soul, the human soul, and to what extent is the human being a machine? So around the 1740s and 50s, you get these very elaborate machines being made that imitate the natural world, and there are these beautiful examples. Vaucanson in Paris, who is this famous inventor who created, a mechanical flute player who could actually blow the flute. I mean, there was sort of lungs inside. It wasn't a little mini organ inside a kind of fake machine. He actually had fingers and a tongue, a strange leather tongue that actually blew the air through the flute. So this very famous flute player, very famous. He also created a boy who could play the drums and kind of play the flute at the same time. And famously, one of his great, this inventor's, one of his great claims to fame was his creation of a mechanical duck. And the thing about the duck, which really amazed audiences and was the kind of evidence that the line between the machine and real life was very, very fine, was that the duck could apparently eat food, corn put in front of it, digest it for a little while, and then lo and behold, it could excrete substances as a result of its digestive processes. Well, clearly it was actually a fake and the stuff was in there already, but the excitement about these machines that sort of explore the line between the human and then the kind of superhuman, or some kind of other realm, was very strong. Frederick the Great loved these instruments. They went all over Europe. People bought them, and of course we've all heard mechanical clocks, which some of those were very, very elaborately made with all sorts of moving parts as well. In France, there was also famously a harpsichord player designed essentially after Marie Antoinette, who was like a full life-size automaton who could play the harpsichord. And not only could she play the harpsichord, but she could kind of turn her eyes and her bosom would heave as she played, giving the impression that she was a fully sensing creature. So that also relates to this idea of the harmonica being this machine that could somehow manufacture sensibility and kind of, the senses of the musical being.
Right, and it certainly helped that the glass harmonica has this otherworldly sound. It sounds really quite supernatural.
Yeah.
You watch somebody play it and you can't quite fathom that sound. It's a little like an onde martineau, a manufactured electronic instrument of the 20th century. It kind of oozes sound.
Yeah.
In fact, making chamber music with a glass harmonica player is a really interesting challenge because you can't quite ever decide where the note starts. It just kind of glides in.
Yeah.
And trying to be really precise is difficult.
That's exactly what people loved about it. It was like, you can't, it just happens. This sound is just there. And people thought it very ghostly, very uncanny. And you're right that this is a world we're talking about of rich people. I mean, these instruments were very expensive. I mean, obviously the glass harmonica, very fragile, and the kind of thing that was displayed at courts, and both kind of out of reach of normal people and very exotic, very glamorous, and sort of, the unworldliness also was a sign of, this was not mundane music making that
right. Since we've introduced the glass harmonica with such a lot of detail, we should probably sample a piece. This played by Dennis James, glass harmonica virtuoso from upstate New York, on a program that Ars Lyrica offered a couple of seasons ago called Sweet Philomela. The reference here is to one of the a goddess mentioned in the opening text of a cantata that we'll encounter in a few minutes' time. But this first excerpt features just the glass harmonica on its own, played by Dennis James in Mozart's famous Adagio in C major. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Annette, you probably know more about this than I do since you introduced me to him, but Dennis's instrument he made himself, yes?
No, he didn't make it himself, but he was
Okay.
very deeply involved in its being made. He
Got
basically
it.
did all the research, and then he worked very closely with the glass makers to make it. So he didn't technically blow the glass, but it could not have been made. I mean, he went to just glass, expert glassmakers, and then commissioned it in all its detail.
Right, and it has a very obviously 18th century kind of design aesthetic to it, complete with a foot pumping mechanism by which you make the spindle turn on which those glasses hang. And you have to wet your fingers in order to play it. That's what activates the sound coming out of the glasses. So it's quite complicated, but a beautiful instrument, and one that I will say doesn't travel all that well. When Dennis tours with it, he has to pack it very carefully in his automobile and basically drive it around the country, because putting something like that on an airplane is, well, just asking for trouble.
Absolutely. Dennis actually lent me a glass harmonica for a few years, or at least for about a year at one point, very generously. And it's a palaver, taking it apart, putting it together, and playing it, I will say, is extremely difficult. I was shocked at how hard it is to play that thing, to get the sound out of it is really tricky. So he's an amazing player, really great virtuoso.
Did you manage the Mozart on your own or not? I imagine that's a piece that everybody tries.
I got close to it, and then I was working my way through a method from the 1780s, but I never, the instrument had to go away. Dennis needed it for something else, and I've never had it back. But I'm hoping one day to get it back and go back to my weird midnight, musical music on that instrument.
All you need to do is open the windows and the neighbors will wonder what in the world is going on in that house.
It's like having a werewolf in the neighborhood.
There was another piece on the same program that also featured the glass harmonica. This is a cantata by Adolph, a composer who worked at the Dresden court for many years, but also spent a good deal of time in Austria, in Vienna. And the story of this piece is kind of complicated. It has to do, first of all, with a glass harmonica virtuoso by the name of Marianne Davies, who had a sister by the name of Cecilia. And as I remember, Marianne was a student of Franklin himself.
Yeah. Or a protege of Franklin, essentially. She got the instrument from him and learned how to play it from him, yes.
Got it. And her sister was a gifted singer. They ended up doing a tour of Europe. They're English, I believe, right? They ended up doing a tour of Europe, and they got letters of introduction from people like C.P.E. Bach and others. They ended up in Vienna, staying with, as I mentioned, Johann Adolph Hasse, who composed the two of them a piece. It's a big cantata featuring a string section, a couple of horns, some flutes, a glass harmonica, and a soprano on this fantastic text that conjures Philomela, that mentions Cecilia as well, the goddess of music. And celebrates an important wedding. This is for the wedding of one of Maria Theresia, the Empress's daughters, to the Duke of Parma, as I recall, in 1769. So this fulfilled a political event, the union of two royal houses, as it were, but also used this fantastic invention of the glass harmonica in a very special way. There aren't many pieces like this. Do you know any others, Annette?
No, I don't. This is really unique, and it speaks a little bit to the excitement that people felt about the instrument itself. Because I mean, the piece is one of the extraordinary things is it's about the wedding in a very peripheral and generic way, but it's really about the glass harmonica, and it's called l'harmonica, the harmonica. And remember that one of the shticks essentially is the way the soprano voice and the sound of the harmonica have this really interesting kind of doubling effect. The idea was that Cecilia could match her voice so beautifully to the harmonica's sound that you couldn't tell which was the harmonica and which was the actual voice. So it's a really beautiful, and much of it is, there's this invocation to Philomela and how can I celebrate this august occasion with music appropriately. And then it's like, I know what I'll do. I'll have this, I can't possibly really do it, but I'll get this amazing, brilliant invention and this incredible like uber music to do it for me. Over to you, sister. And then we hear this incredible music. So it's very much about what the harmonica can and can't do. It's interesting, and you get this sense of Hasse being totally fascinated by the instrument, by these two sisters, and sort of using that as a way of celebrating this political moment.
Yeah, it's a fantastic piece. From that performance, I'd like to sample just the final aria, which takes some time. It's in multiple sections, but it features, as we said, the glass harmonica with Dennis James, and also soprano Sherazad Pantaki, singing the famous text here, the hymn to Philomela, and this wonderful evocation of this royal wedding that was taking place in Vienna in 1769. So here's the last aria, about 8 or 9 minutes, as I recall. Enjoy.